Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living podcast and YouTube broadcast. Thrive Co-Living is a new concept in creative community building. Sustainable, multicultural, multi-generational, and inclusive, Thrive Co-Living communities are built from repurposed big box stores or other suitable buildings. In this series, myself, Jennifer Hooper, and Thrive founder, Mark Stein, will weave together the tapestry that makes up the physical and spiritual components of this new concept in community living. Now on with the show. Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Thrive Co-Living podcast. My name is Jennifer Hooper and I am here with my co-host, Mark Stein. How are you, Mark?
Hi, doing really well.
Good, great. We have a wonderful guest today that we're going to introduce in just a moment. But before we do that, I got to show off our Thrive t-shirts, Mark.
Oh, good.
For our YouTube viewers, this is such a great design, great comfortable t-shirt that is available, as well as other designs, on the thrivecoliving.org website. And if any of our viewers would like to purchase one, 100% of the profit goes to fundraising for Thrive Co-Living. And so go check it out. Go find store over on the website.
And it is thrivecolivingcommunities.org.
Boy, good thing you're here.
A mouthful, but that's what it is.
thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thank you for that. We got to send people to the right place.
Right. Looks good on you.
Yeah. Well, I love it. Today, we are joined by Peter Kageyama. Was I close?
Kageyama, yes.
Okay.
Happens
my
all
best.
the time.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
I bet you're the first one to stumble on his last name.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Peter is an author, speaker, and expert in livable and lovable cities. And I just love that description, as well as the author of 3 books: For the Love of Cities, Love Where You Live, and most recently, The Emotional Infrastructure of Places. And he's done a TEDx talk. TEDx, where was that?
I've done several, actually.
Oh, have you?
Tampa Bay, Colorado, the front, yeah.
I watched one I thought came from Idaho or Iowa.
Oh, Iowa City. Yeah.
Iowa City. Okay. Thought it was an I. That's the one I found and loved. So I'm delighted to talk to you and learn more about what you do. Mark, I'll turn it over to you to get started, and we'll just see what unfolds naturally.
Great. Well, Peter, it's great to have you with us. Thanks so much for doing this.
Sure, my pleasure.
And my first question is about the origin of your interest in the topic. I mean, loving your city and creating lovable cities has been a theme for you. And I'd be very curious and blend this in a little bit with background and how you got to loving that theme.
Sure. So in the early 2000s, about 2003, I was an independent consultant, marketing consultant, did a lot of internet-based work. And my then wife brought home Richard Florida's book, The Rise of the Creative Class. And many will probably know that book. It's sort of a seminal book in terms of community and economic development. She said, hey, you should read this because he's coming to Tampa Bay, in a couple months. In fact, she was part of the group that helped bring Richard to Tampa Bay for the first time. So I read the book, met Richard, and it was revelatory. He's talking about creative people and how important they were to communities, how economies were going to be driven by, these creative, innovative people. And I was like, this is amazing. So we formed an organization around that idea called Creative Tampa Bay. And I got really involved in that, a volunteer organization. I eventually became the president of that organization. And there is an adage that says, you are what you think about, right? So if you think about cities a lot, you're going to become a city guy. So I found I was doing a lot more thinking about my community and cities than I really was about marketing and all this other kind of stuff. And fortunately, other opportunities sort of arose, and I got to work with Richard. I got to work with some other of the leading sort of thought leaders in this space. We started producing content, producing conferences. I get invited to speak at stuff, and it starts to sort of happen. And it was about 2007, I was working with another gentleman by the name of Charles Landry, and I helped put together a speaking tour for him. He's the author of the Creative City. He's sort of the English Richard Florida, although he's actually been doing it longer even than Richard. And we were actually in Toronto, and Charles was speaking, and I was there with him. We're in the big spaceship City Hall of Toronto. If you've ever seen that, it's this wild sort of 1970s style architecture. It looks like something very like futuristic, like a la the Jetsons, but it's a really cool building. And so before Charles spoke, they actually had the mayor of Toronto spoke, and he brought up the poet laureate for the city of Toronto, a gentleman by the name of Giorgio de Chico. And Giorgio said the thing that sparked my imagination and all of this. He got up and he had this really wonderful baritone voice, and he said, "Arts and culture are what make a city fall in love with itself." I was like, wow. That floored me. And I thought, I've never heard somebody talk about a city with that word love and sort of with that sort of intonation and that sort of emphasis. And I thought, we're in a relationship with our places. It's like, wow. And that, I think, started that whole thinking, and took several years for it to fully sort of form. But I absolutely give credit to Giorgio, and I wrote about him in my first book. And that was, sometimes it's that little thing, that seed. And that was it for me. Love. Who knew it mattered? So yeah.
Very cool.
I love it. This work that you're talking about is very near and dear to my heart. I earned my a master's of fine arts at the University of Maine in a program called Intermedia, and my concentration was going to be in community engagement and artwork. And I studied Richard Florida's work, and I spent a lot of time going to Providence to engage in water fire.
Oh,
and
my favorite.
study
Yeah,
the
love
murals
water
at Philadelphia, and
Yeah.
even my local community has had experienced over the last 10 to 15 years, a renaissance of engagement in art and culture and music. And I can just see it matters. It truly, truly matters.
Yeah. And what matters about it is oftentimes not just the financial. I mean, there's, Americans for the Arts does this whole economic impact of the arts on places. They try to, figure out, the full-time equivalent jobs and the impact. It's like, and that's important and that's good. But if you are trying to figure out why arts and culture matter from a purely economic standpoint, you're doing it wrong. It's not about that. Arts and culture means something else. Yeah, of course they add up to big numbers, actually, but it's far more important, and it's fundamental to who we are there. And I often think that we miss that point when we try to reduce it down to, making the same impact as, a job, at Walmart or Costco or something like that.
So, Peter, you got your start in the Tampa Bay, and we're wanting to create the first Thrive co-living community in Tampa Bay.
Yes.
So tell us the things that you love and that you help create that people love in the Tampa Bay area.
Well, I will give you sort of props for considering Tampa Bay. It's a great place. I've lived down here for about 26 years. I'm actually originally from Ohio there. But one of the things that I think is sort of really interesting about Tampa Bay is it very much is this wonderful cross-section of America. It's no surprise that so many businesses and corporations use Tampa Bay as a test market, because we really are highly, highly representative of America as a whole. So something that will, if you're looking to launch a new idea, if this is a great proving ground, for it. I think also cost of living down here is certainly a little bit more affordable than maybe trying to do this project up in New York City or in Northern California or something like that. And I think there's something about Tampa Bay that we're open to new ideas, because this is a highly transient community. I mean, Florida as a whole has a fairly high turnover of people. And with that turnover of people comes this acceptance, I think, of new ideas, new energy. So you're trying to do something that's kind of, very much revolutionary, something that people haven't really seen before. So here is a good place to maybe try that, because again, people are used to being the new guy and they're used to the new idea, and they're used to seeing, like, hey, that looks kind of cool. And I think they're more than willing to maybe give you guys a shot here, there. So I think, good call on that.
And let's talk St. Pete in particular, which
My
is where
favorite.
you
Yes.
where you reside.
Mhm.
And I have felt what you're talking about, and a sense of acceptance. The
Mhm.
chamber,
Yes.
Chris at the chamber has
Chris
been
Steinacher, amazing guy.
embracing, and there is something about this spirit. And I know that you're into pet-friendly communities as well.
Yeah,
That's
dog
something
friendly, really,
really
for
great.
the most part. But yeah, I'm all for all kinds of pets, but I think there's a special place for dogs, and I'd be happy to talk about that a little bit too. Yeah. But St. Pete, I think, is special. It is a bit of a gem here, and I unabashedly say St. Pete is the best city in Florida. I think we're the fifth largest city, but it's not necessarily about the size of the city. It's about this wonderful combination of arts and culture and beauty and some wonderful amenities, a good economy, and part of it is design. St. Pete is on Tampa Bay, so we're bracketed by the bay on one side, and of course, we spread inward from there. But there's this incredible compactness to some of St. Pete that you just don't find in other parts of Florida. St. Pete is in Pinellas County, and Pinellas is actually the densest county in Florida. We don't necessarily think about Florida as being terribly dense, but that's kind of the case. And we're a walkable city. And there aren't too many Florida cities that are actually walkable. Now, I admit I don't necessarily walk in July and August, even to go a few blocks. I mean, that's just the reality of the weather. But we could, obviously. So yeah, St. Pete has a lot of wonderful sort of advantages going there. And and Mark, you mentioned it. This is a particularly open and welcoming community to all kinds of people and all kinds of new ideas.
Peter, as we are moving forward with the Thrive co-living community and have this desire to create engagement and community, do you have any tips that you can offer on how to do that in a residential setting like Thrive?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me applaud you guys for just the concept. I mean, when Mark and I first met there a few months ago, and you told me about this, that's kind of brilliant. There, and we do have a lot of these empty big boxes there. And I actually wrote about this in my latest book. This whole idea of adaptive reuse and giving a second life to something is really kind of important. And while most people are not going to get too nostalgic about basically ugly big box spaces, there is still something interesting about taking that old container and turning it into something new and different. And I think that you're doing something that is important. Residential, is incredibly important to communities, and most communities are facing an affordable housing shortage, and part of that is and hopefully will be solved by the sort of the genius of what you guys are doing. The other part that I think is missing in that sort of just general economic conversation about housing is the human side of this, the social side of this, is that we are also living through an epidemic of loneliness, right? And yes, we could build great apartments and condos and more affordable housing, but if people still feel isolated and alone, we're really not addressing some of the fundamental issues of our humanity. And I think that you guys actually are, by bringing people together, creating this immediate sense of community within the thriving community model, you're actually doing something beyond just providing somebody a place for somebody to live. You're actually connecting them with each other, with their places, with their better selves. So kudos to you for that.
Before we go any further, I just want to take a brief moment. If people are unfamiliar with Thrive, if this is the first that they've heard of this community or tuning into this video or podcast for the first time, go to YouTube, go to the beginning of our podcast episodes where we have a trailer that gives a very brief overview, but then a really deep dive with Mark here with us, who is the founder of this project, where he explains exactly what Thrive Co-Living is all about.
So Peter, let's talk about some of the great stories that you tell. And, I would introduce you as a storyteller. Um,
Yeah, that's
uh,
kind of what I do. Yeah.
and you have great stories about things that are going on in different cities.
Mhm.
Um, so just pull some out and talk to us about it. My favorite one is the Smurf one, if you can include that one,
The
um,
Smurf one.
where a city where a Smurf movie was
Oh,
filmed.
the Blue City. Yes.
Yes,
Okay, that's
but tell us your
okay.
favorite ones. You've
Well,
got
I'll start. You can't just
hundreds.
tease the Blue City and then
That's
walk
right.
away from it.
We
So
gotta
there
hear it
was,
now.
you guys may remember 10, 15 years, maybe closer to 15 years ago, there was a Smurf movie, like a live action, sort of animated / live action movie of the Smurfs. Well, they were looking for a set, a place to do. Was it Smurfville? It's like I'm too old for that. I think it's where the
Used to
Smurfs
love
actually.
the Smurfs, but I don't
Yeah,
remember.
I
It's a
don't.
long
Yeah,
time ago.
and they're looking for a little city that was willing to paint itself blue to be the set. And there was this small city in Italy that agreed to do that. And after the filming was done, the studios offered to paint it back. They said no, leave it. We kind of like it. And it became one of those interesting things where it was actually something that helped define them. It brought them together, and it certainly created a sort of sense of unique identity, for
Really.
town. And it actually created tourist revenue because of that. And think about this. I mean, every place in the world is striving to find what is something that makes us just a little bit different and what's our better story, as we go out there. So all of us are looking for that something. Now, I'm not suggesting every city needs to go and paint itself, a whole different color. But if the opportunity presented itself, you go with that. Jennifer, you mentioned water fire
Hmm.
in Providence, Rhode Island. And for those of the folks who don't know what that is, it's this incredible city ritual that's been going on for about 20, 25 years now.
Closer to 25, I think now.
Yeah. They started, by putting these braziers in the middle of the river, and they bring in cords of pine wood and they light it on fire. It is water and fire. It's the most basic thing in the world, and it is absolute magic because it's essentially a bonfire on the river. And if you've ever been there during an event, thousands of people will come down there to the river just to walk around and bask in that sort of bonfire sort of atmosphere.
And
And
music is piped through
music is
speakers
piped through it, right?
all the way up
Yeah.
and down the canal.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes it's themed around certain stuff,
Hmm.
but it's real. Again, think about that idea of the bonfire. All of us, we have sat in front of a campfire or a bonfire, and we've been mesmerized by that, right? There's something in our human nature that we can watch fire and be incredibly content. Well, water fire is that taken to a whole other level there. And that's one of those things that gives Providence a unique identity. I mean, Providence has all kinds of wonderful, there's architecture, RISD's there, Brown is there, yeah, Cthulhu is there. I mean, there's all kinds of really interesting stuff there. But water fire is one of those highly memorable things that people absolutely love and attach to. So sometimes it's not the biggest thing or the most obvious thing. Sometimes it's the blue paint, or it's water fire, or it's something small and even more hyper local. So yeah, and those are the types of stories that I tell. And Mark is right. I am essentially a storyteller. Because what I try to do is I try to share some experience, some other example from another place that might actually help a city that's trying to figure out, hey, how do we reimagine our downtown? Or hey, we're having this problem, around maybe safety and gangs or something like this, or we have a graffiti problem. Jennifer mentioned the Philadelphia Mural Arts Project, and that's another one that's absolutely amazing. And I wrote about that in the first book.
Yeah, the way
Imagine,
Philadelphia turned around that
yeah,
problem and made it an
yeah,
opportunity is amazing.
yeah, because everybody, talks about graffiti. Well, the solution to graffiti is not whitewashing a wall because that doesn't work. That basically, it invites more graffiti. The solution to graffiti is better graffiti. Usually in the form of a mural. And the Philadelphia figured that out. The Mural Arts Project there in Philadelphia has a multi-million-dollar annual budget to do murals, and they do I think there's over 3,000 city murals that they've actively curated over time. And here in St. Petersburg, Mark knows this because he's been down here. St. Pete has become a city of murals. There's several hundred murals that have popped up over the last few years. here, especially in downtown St. Pete, in part due to the Shine Mural Arts Festival, but because of this culture, that we're trying to bring. Because ugly bare walls or tagged walls, that doesn't help anybody. But a great mural, actually, taggers respect, for the most part, quality work, and they won't tag a good mural. So yeah, you've got hundreds of murals that create a sense of activity, a sense of vitality and uniqueness. When you're walking down that street and you see those murals, you go, I'm in St. Petersburg, because it's like, that's the place where I see this kind of artwork. So yeah, that is one of those little things that has helped differentiate us.
And would you say that that helps to cultivate a culture of pride too
Of course.
in your city? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. Part of our sense of pride is where you're from. And when you want to say, it's like from this particular place. And again, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from a Rust Belt city. I'm from Akron, Ohio. And lots of Rust Belt cities have gotten, for a generation or so, they've almost apologized for, who and what they are. And that's kind of sad. And I think we've seen a resurgence of pride in sort of those Rust Belt cities, because they've done some amazing things, adaptive reuse and reimagining themselves. But at heart, all of us want to feel like, hey, we come from a good place, because it reflects on us. If I feel like I live in a crap town, what does that say about me there? So hopefully, you find something, even if your town is struggling, there's got to be something that you still love about that place. And I think that, once you remember that, maybe you find another thing and another thing. And then, and maybe from there, we start the hard work that maybe is making our places even better. Because it's got to start from, I think it's got to start from a place of love, not a place of fear, not a place of necessarily of desperation. Because if you're afraid and you're desperate, it's easier to move than maybe to stay and build.
I spend half my time in Louisville, Kentucky, and the other half in St. Pete. And Louisville undertook a project several years ago where they created a series, not of murals, but huge posters, banners on the side of buildings, and brought in the people that are from Louisville, Muhammad Ali, Jennifer Lawrence, and the theme was Muhammad's Louisville.
Nice.
And they were plastered. They're plastered all over the city. So definitely pride generating. You do a lot of work with cities and go in to cities that are looking for a niche. Talk to us a little bit about what you do and how you approach that. As you were saying,
Yeah.
It's not like you probably have to bring some parties together and do some brainstorming, and how do they know, and how do you know that they've hit on something that might work for them? Just talk about your process a little bit. It's fascinating.
Sure. Well, I'm not a traditional sort of consultant in that sense. Again, as you said, I'm a storyteller. I'm an observer. And I'm not an architect. I'm not a planner. I'm not none of that stuff. I'm actually a lawyer by training, right? I call myself a recovering attorney there. But the nice thing about, I have a good liberal arts education, and I believe I see connections. I see through different disciplines, right? And I think that's part of the challenge, part of what I think I bring to the table is I help people see and feel their city in a different way. If I was a transportation guy, I would look at the city as a transportation problem. If I'm an engineer, I might look at it as an engineering problem. If I'm a planner, it's a planning problem. It's all of that. Cities are complex problems, right? And the only way you're actually going to ultimately sort of move the needle is if you think about stuff in a more holistic sort of way, in far more of an artistic way. There, Jennifer, you mentioned you sort of an arts background. Well, a good artist steals from everybody, right? I steal from everybody. I steal from the traffic guys. I steal from the planners, the architects, and I try to meld that together into some sort of narrative. Now, as far as my process goes, the thing that I start with, say, find some people who still love your community. That's the first thing. And then try to see the community through their eyes. What is it that they love about this place? And then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. That's a strength. And we build from that. And then the other thing I tell cities, I tell communities all the time, is to start small. everybody wants to go to the big place, right? We go, we all live in places and everyone does the brainstorming and all of that kind of, the charrettes and the focus groups. We get people together and say, what do we need for our community? And folks will come up with stuff. Almost always it's big, expensive stuff. It's going to take lots and lots of time, right? Well, I say, let's start at the other end. Let's start with some really small stuff that we can do, the three of us, and the folks who are watching this, that we could do together next weekend, as opposed to trying to find something that's got, tens of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars of budget that's going to take time and permits and all kinds of other stuff. Let's start really small. Let's build some momentum from there. So lots of small things actually start to add up to this sense of, hey, there's stuff happening. And when folks start to feel like there's stuff happening, they start to lean in and they go, hey, this is kind of interesting. Or they say, hey, look at what our neighbors did. They go, that's cool, but you know what? I could do better. And that sort of becomes sort of the civic challenge, as it were, that when our neighbors and our community starts to get involved, it's like, well, why aren't I doing at least something? Why aren't I at least going and supporting them, sort of moving forward? So again, I start small with little things that are going to make people smile and maybe nod their heads, go, that's kind of cool. And eventually then, we'll get around to trying to fix the transportation system, and the parking and all of the other stuff that's going to drive people nuts for basically forever. So,
To your point, when I was in graduate school, I actually did a project engaging with the community and found different opportunities for people to answer the question, if you could wave a magic wand, what would make Bangor better?
Yeah.
It was little things, more trash cans, bike racks, more art walks. They were big things too, but those more achievable, smaller things made a huge difference. They really did.
That's an interesting question because, if you could wave a magic wand, it's like you're trying to fix a thing, right? So the trash cans, the bike racks, that because you've almost frames the question a little bit differently, so, but again, most charrettes, most cities ask the questions like, well, what do we need to do to get better? What do we need to do to be competitive in the 21st century? How do we attract jobs? How do we do it? And again, that comes back to just bigger, more complex stuff.
Yeah, I like the magic wand question.
Yeah, it's good.
One thread that I see through a lot of your stories is the word fun.
Oh, yeah.
You seem to look to have fun and look to help cities have fun.
Yeah.
Maybe talk about that a little bit and give us some more examples of some of the fun stuff that's really drawn attention in cities.
I believe fun is a legitimate goal. And unfortunately, I think as everyday people, we go, yeah, fun's important. I think the problem is that city leaders don't necessarily believe that they're allowed to have fun. Because somebody's going to say, hey, if the city council's having that much fun, they're not really doing their job, right? Because again, there's always that scrutiny. It's like, hey, if they're having fun, that's not supposed to be fun. That's like, well, why not? If we're having fun while doing something, you're going to be doing it probably better than if you were miserable doing it, right? So fun is a legitimate objective in doing this stuff. And then that becomes, if it's a legitimate objective, then it's okay to spend money on stuff that is just fun, plain fun, right? As opposed to having to serve some sort of, functional and safe purpose, which again is how we typically want to spend civic dollars. We want to fix roads. We want to maintain the police and fire service. And that's all we're ever going to do. Well, that's not much of a city. That's not much of a community. It doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, right? No, at heart, we know that the things that people really gravitate to are beyond the most obvious, functional and safe, are requirements. Don't get me wrong. You have to have those, in a place. But that's not why somebody's going to choose to live in one place versus another. Because if it's just about roads and, bridges and basic, services and stuff like that, then every place is the same. And we know that's not the case. So the fun stuff is, what are those unique little touches that are going to make, one place different than the other? Go back, water fire, great example. It's wonderful and it's fun, but it doesn't even have to be, that big. Like one of the stories I tell is about this group out of Seattle that started this little project called Rainworks. And they use what this stuff is called a super hydrophobic coating, which basically prevents stuff from getting wet. So they spray this stuff through a stencil onto sidewalks, right, or pavement. And when it rains, and it rains a lot in Seattle, that basically it retards the concrete from getting wet. So it creates this inverse. It creates an image, a message, or something like that. Well, it basically just appears when it rains, and I love showing that to folks because they go, "That's so cool. We could do that." And of course they should. And I've been to places where they've actually welcomed me with, hey, check out what we did out in front of the theater. It's like, oh, this is great. Because again, it makes somebody smile. And that is a legitimate goal. And yet we're almost afraid to sort of say that, that kids laughing, people having a good time, that we're going to pay, money, taxpayer dollars, to do that, because then some politician's going to feel like they have to justify that to that naysayer who goes, why are you spending money on anything other than fixing potholes in police and fire service? Because again, and that backfoots them. It's like, no, so of course I'm going to pay for fun. That's why we're here. It's not just the most basic sort of things. And you almost want to say to those people who only want to look at the most basic kind of stuff. It says, man, what color is the sky in your world? Because I worry about you if that's really all you're concerned about.
How do you break down those walls or break down the obstacles when you do meet resistance? And again, I've had this situation where I went in front of my my city's, it was the Bangor Historic Society. I don't know. It was a government regulation.
Sure.
Very, very anti-mural.
Yeah.
We have to preserve, and I get it, they have a mission, but there was also, I feel like, some missed opportunity. And so do you have any examples of how you've been able to get around some of that?
Well, humor is one way. You say it with a smile. It's like, you're really, you're really not doing a good job, but I love you for it nonetheless. No, honestly, the way I typically try to get around this is, again, start small. Instead of, we'd love to do it on that historic bank building in the heart of downtown, because that'd be a great place for a mural, but we run into resistance from the bank or from the historical preservation. It's like, okay, how about we do, let's do one, you mentioned it, Mark, you mentioned it. Instead of doing a mural, how about we do like the hanging thing, like they did in Louisville? Well, that's not going to hurt anything, and it's temporary, and it'll envision something a little bit different. So you look for the creative solution, or you do the temporary thing there with the rainworks. You spray paint some interesting messages on the sidewalk that's there. When it gets wet, that says something kind of cool about the building there. So you look for those little sort of opportunities, or you do something right across the street, on the deli that's over there that says, yeah, come do a mural on my wall. I'm all for it. There.
That's awesome.
And at some point, even the naysayers have got to say, all right, we got to say yes to something eventually, right?
Yes.
Don't we? Yeah. So again, starting small, looking, to be creative. And I'm all for asking for forgiveness versus, permission. Right. And a lot of times when you have to go up against, civic, the official folks, well, their first inclination is to say no. Because think about it, bureaucracy is based on the idea of those folks don't get into trouble for saying no to stuff. They're worried about saying yes to the wrong thing. So part of it is maybe we need to create some space for them to be able to say yes. And part of that is us ordinary folks doing stuff. And then it's also at the highest levels, it's getting your mayor or your city manager on board to say, you know what, we really do want to do more fun stuff here. We want to take some risks, do something a little bit differently, and letting them lead from the front to let their troops know. It's like, you know what, that's okay. Let's try to say yes to a few more things, because again, what's the ultimate goal here? It's got to be, yes, it's functional and safe. We got to have a safe community, but it's also got to be something higher, something better.
I love that. I think the baby step approach works really well.
We've
had some local artists who have done wheat pasting on walls. It's temporary.
What is that like?
It's like, think paper mache.
Oh, cool.
But it's art. Okay. Yeah.
All right. And then when it rains, it probably just
it endures for longer than one rain, like months.
Okay. That's
and
cool.
And then that turned into like a scavenger hunt of the murals in the area.
Yeah. Or you ever heard of yarn bombing?
No. What's
Think of it as like knitting a sweater for a sign or a tree or something like that. Look up. Awesome. If folks have ever heard of yarn bombing, go to Google them and just type in yarn bombing, and you'll see some really creative stuff. Because when we talk about being creative for your community, a lot of times people say, well, you got to be able to paint. It's like, well, I don't know how to paint, or I don't know how to wheat paste. I'm not a sculptor either. Somebody says, well, can you knit? Somebody says, yeah, I can knit. It's like, well, let's go make a sweater for that really cool tree downtown.
Oh,
Okay.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very
And
cool. That's
again, it's
fun.
one of those little
Yeah.
things. It's fun. It's a little bit
Yeah.
different.
Little
Yeah.
whimsical.
It's definitely whimsical.
I really like the idea of going to public officials, asking for very little money and sometimes no
Yes.
money, and
Yeah.
that probably helps a lot.
Yes,
But
it does.
you've talked about some of the naysayers. Talk about some of the people that you like to engage
Yes.
that will move the ball forward, and because
Yeah.
you're not going to be there for that long in a city.
Right.
You're looking for allies. Who
Yes.
do you find? What types of people do you find
Yeah.
are the ones that help you light a fire and
Yeah.
get things moving? Who do you
Well,
like?
in my books, I actually have a term for this, and this is I've used this from the very beginning. It's a term I use. They're called co-creators, because these are the folks who are essentially co-creating the experience of the city along with the official folks. There's people whose jobs it is to create the content that is your place, your city. Mayors, council, planners, architects, designers, developers. It's their job to make the content that is the city. But think about it. Think about those unofficial folks, the ones who aren't paid to do it, the ones who just have this creativity, this sense of community, and it manifests in some really unique ways, right? It's the artists, it's the local entrepreneurs who do stuff not because they want to make a ton of money, but because they want to create great spaces. They want to create something unique for their community there. These co-creators are in every one of our communities, and they absolutely matter. So what I've done, what I try to do is I've given them a name. So now when the mayor or the city council, or they're trying to say, hey, let's go talk to more of those co-creators like XYZ, this person. And usually what I do when I go to like a specific city is I say, tell me about the people who like those types of people. And they go, oh, well, you need to meet John. You need to meet Jane, there. And they'll go and they'll introduce me, and we'll talk more about that. And then a lot of times what I'll do is then I'll point to my hosts, the folks who brought me here, the economic development folks, the city, the mayor, any of those groups. I say, you need to do more to support them because they make your place unique and different. Yes, they may not employ as many people as, as a Costco or Walmart or a CVS drugstore, but I guarantee you that local coffee shop, the really cool boutique retail place, the little art gallery has so much more character, or adds so much more character to your place than those other things. Because again, that could be anywhere, but because you have that person and they're doing this thing for your community, that's special. So you need to figure out how to support them a little bit more. And I'm not necessarily talking about money, but how do we make maybe things just a little bit easier? And once we've identified those co-creators, then you're going to say, oh yeah, that's this person as well. So giving them a name and sort of defining them for folks, I think helps them identify them moving forward long after I leave. Hopefully they're still talking about how do we support more of our co-creators? Because again, every community has them there, and a lot of times they're out there just sort of on their own. Well, if we're the leaders of a community, well then how do I marshal those folks even just a little bit and maybe point them towards a particular objective that maybe we as the city officially have? Hey, we really want to redevelop our downtown. St. Pete has been focused on the downtown pier for a decade, and it finally just opened here, a little over a month ago. So you can point those, or sort of nudge those co-creators in a particular direction, and they do amazing things. And again, they're not paid to do this stuff, certainly not by the city. This is just how their sense of community and how their sense of creativity manifests in some amazing ways.
And they get things done.
Yes, they do.
That's the difference between them and a lot of these public officials. They get shit done.
Well, I have sympathy for the public officials. And a lot of times I meet some of the most creative and innovative people who are actually in government. But they're operating under a set of constraints that most of us, the artists, the entrepreneurs, the folks like us who get out there and do stuff, we would really chafe at the amount of, of constraints that those folks have. So God bless them that they have that patience and they still want to get things done. That, we need more of the Leslie Nopes of the world. If you remember Parks and Rec, maybe the greatest public official of all time, has the most love for her community and was willing to work inside the system because she believed in that. So yes, those folks, they do. More power to them. But you're right. The co-creators are the ones who are out there getting stuff done on their own a lot of times. And that's the thing. They almost get stuff done despite their cities, because a lot of times the city, again, they want to say no to stuff. Well, how do we say yes to a few more things? How do we create that space, for those co-creators to operate and maybe even thrive and do even more amazing things?
I see, uh, back to Thrive, I see us as wanting to draw those
Hmm.
people that are creative in their respective realms
Yeah.
and have a lot of energy to give. Um, so maybe give us a little more in the way of suggestions for how we can draw those
Hmm.
people,
Yeah.
and anything else in your view and from your perspective that will help us
Hmm.
create the kind of community that we want to create and have it
Yeah.
replicable in multiple cities. Easy for me to say.
Yeah. Well, the thing about creative people is they tend to want to also be around other creative people. That, like follows like, game recognizes game, right? And they don't necessarily have to be in the same profession or the same industry at all. But somebody who's a musician might actually want to hang around a graphic artist. Why? Because they just see the world a little bit differently. That there's something about that. So maybe one of the things that Thrive could actually do, and I know we're still in sort of the prototyping and sort of the early stages of what you guys are doing, but at some point it might be interesting to say, you know what, we're moving into St. Pete, which is known as an arts and cultural, an arts community, strong arts community. Maybe the Thrive community here intentionally tries to position this project as a creative community, that we're going to look to attract artists and designers and creative entrepreneurs and filmmakers and writers, all this other kind of stuff, because we think that they might actually find something in common there and really kind of want to live together. So maybe a theme around that. There, I actually worked on a project years ago in Michigan, where they were trying to do that around this giant armory there in southern Michigan. There, and the problem was because it was state dollars. They couldn't officially say you had to be an artist to move into this affordable housing, but they really tried to market it that way. But you guys don't have you have that ability. It's like, look, we're looking for a group of creative folks who kind of want to focus on this. That might be a way to do it. The other way might also be even to focus it on retirement age. And I know we haven't really talked about this, but there's something interesting about sort of empty nesters and recent retirees, that they want this sort of sense of community. They want to live, together and be supportive, and have this social connection with a place. So that might, so looking for these natural communities of interest, be it, age, professions, again, sort of worldview, that creative sort of worldview might be a really interesting way to approach this, there as well. And then if you think about that, then that also lends itself to what is going to be sort of the commercial aspect of what you guys are doing. And I know we've talked about this, that these are residential units, but they're also going to have a commercial component, or potentially have a commercial component in there. Well, if this is generally we're trying to make this into an older or sort of a semi-retirement sort of community. Well, what about sort of a healthcare component that is actually in there? A doctor's office, I don't know, like an urgent care, but something maybe a little bit more creative than that. Or on the other side, there, an art gallery or a studio space that is actually ingrained into that. So I think these natural communities of interest could lend itself to the commercial aspect, or vice versa, within that. And again, I think you guys have tapped into this interesting idea, because as we come out of this pandemic, I think we're going to see this realignment around commercial and residential real estate. There's going to be some winners and losers, and there's going to be this new sort of, where are we in all this? And in that sort of churn that we're going to, I think, be in, maybe that's a really good time to start, looking at some new ideas there, that all of a sudden now this something new pops up under the radar, and people who were, thinking about stuff in a different way, all of a sudden go, that seems interesting. Or wait a minute, I've just spent the last, better part of a year sort of isolated and feeling alone in my apartment complex. So what if I didn't have to feel isolated and alone, that I was actually in a community of people where it was actually encouraged that, that we actually kind of have to know each other, as opposed to being sort of the typical, hey neighbor, it's like, hey, and that's about the extent of our interaction. You can't do that in the Thrive community that you guys have articulated, the vision you've shared with me. That's not what you can do. And that's not what I think at heart a lot of people want to do. I think we want more from our places. We just haven't been given that. We haven't been given the option. Now, at least, you guys are stepping up and hopefully giving people that option.
Very cool.
Peter, I feel like we could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but I think we're going to have to wind this one down.
Oh, we are.
Maybe.
Yeah, we did. That time flies.
Well, can we put one more thing in there though?
Absolutely.
But let's squeeze it in, because Peter, you're taking the opportunity in this COVID era to start a new book. So
yes,
tell us about what you have in mind.
Well, I'm writing a new old book. 2021 will be the 10-year anniversary of my first book. And I was working on this earlier. This is the first one, For the Love of Cities. So I've actually gone back and I've started to re-examine that. And I'm going to do For the Love of Cities Revisited. There was things that I wrote about 10 years ago that are still highly topical. I think I was spot on with that. There's other stuff I realized, maybe that wasn't quite on board, or here's what I've learned, or here's how this has changed. So I think it was a really good time to sort of go back and look at that. And it also gives me a platform to talk about sort of how we're coming out of the pandemic world and how social justice has changed radically in this year as well. And I think that impacts our cities in really some fundamental ways. So it's an opportunity for me to essentially write new stuff without having the onus of writing a completely new book, which was actually, because this one just came out in like November last year. It's like I wasn't ready to write, start another one of these. So I think it was a really good opportunity to reflect and think about sort of what what we've all been exposed to, over the last several months, because the world is different. And a lot to take in. But love still is going to matter. And I think that what I fundamentally talk about, love of place, emotional connection to places and to people there, and small things and emotional infrastructure, that's still going to be incredibly important, maybe even more important, as we move forward.
I love it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Really
My
appreciate
pleasure,
it.
guys. Yeah, this is fun.
How can people reach you if they want to buy your books? Or
Sure. My books are available. Search for my name, Peter Kageyama, on Amazon. All my books are available there. There are ebooks as well. If you want a little bit more information about me, fortheloveofcities.com, or search for me on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. But I'm pretty active on Facebook still. I post some stuff there.
Awesome.
fortheloveofcities.com.
All right. We will also put that in the show notes in both YouTube and the podcast platforms. Mark, any final words from you?
No, just thank you so much for being with us. You've got such great energy. When we met, I knew you were one of us. So let's stay connected and keep communicating. And I'd love to involve you at multiple points along the way in the process. So
you've got a good story, and I'm always looking for another good story.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Right,
yeah. And for anyone watching or listening, again, please go visit thrivecolivingcommunities.org, learn more about what we're up to, and check out the store while you're there. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Thrive Co-Living podcast and YouTube broadcast. To discover more about our mission, activities, and how to find us on social media, please check out our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. There you can also learn how you can support this creative vision in community co-living. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon.